What the heck is a false color? Hello everyone, Marshall here with another video, and in this video we're going to talk about what is false color. Why do they even call it false color? I'm not going to answer that in this video. I really actually hate the term false color. There's already a lot of distrust in science. There's a lot of people that think the earth is flat, and terms like false color don't really help. But that aside, because I don't have a better term for it, we're going to use the term for now, false color. If you have a better term for false color, put it in the comments below. For the sake of this video, I'm just going to be calling it false color, but I'd love to maybe hear some alternatives for the term false color, because like I said, it's kind of misleading. Anyway, so I think one thing that's actually somewhat on the fault of scientists is they don't give you any perspective when they show you a false color image. They just show you the false color image. They'll give you a technical description of what makes it a false color image, and that's it. So for example, when the Hubble imaging team released the pillars of creation, they listed technical details of how they made that image, but they didn't tell you, or show you rather, what the true color version of the pillars of creation would look like. And that's not necessarily their fault, because the Hubble Space Telescope doesn't necessarily work that way. But for people who don't look at space all the time, or scientists or whatever, it's hard to understand them. What exactly does false color mean? What's it doing? Why even bother to do false color and not just make it real color, right? So in this video, I'm going to use images that I've taken, one in true color, one in false color, and I'm going to put them side by side so we can kind of compare the two, and I will also go through the process of how that false color image is made. There's also many different types of false color imagery. For the sake of this video, we're going to keep it simple and stick to one type, and that is on emission nebulae, or nebula. So in order to understand what false color is, in this case, you need to understand what a nebula is. A nebula is basically just a bunch of gas and dust floating in space, hanging out. The stars in a nebula ionize the gas and dust and make it glow, almost like a filament in a light bulb. So a nebula is emitting light, but it doesn't just emit all the light, it emits particular wavelengths of light based on the gases that are in the nebula. And in this case, for the image that we're going to look at today, we have hydrogen, sulfur, and oxygen. And we call these H alpha, which is just regular ionized hydrogen, sulfur 2, which is just regular ionized sulfur, and O3, which is doubly ionized oxygen. So we're going to refer to them as, again, hydrogen alpha, sulfur 2, and O3, just for simplicity's sake. In regular photography, we use a color camera, but for astrophotography, we're often using a monochrome camera. Because it's monochrome, instead of using regular red, green, and blue filters for regular photography, we can instead use narrowband filters. And what these narrowband filters do is they actually reject most of the light that the telescope collects. They look like mirrors, essentially. And what they do is they let through those particular wavelengths of light that are emitted by the gases in the nebula, which again are hydrogen alpha, sulfur 2, and O3. And now that we've talked about the technical details of how we capture nebula, now we can actually look at the images, and I'll show you how it works. All right, so we're here in PixInsight, and I have two images up here of the exact same nebula, but again, one is in true color, one is in false color. All right, so this nebula is called the Tadpoles. So here on the left side, we have the true color image, and on the right side, we have the false color image. The true color image was taken with a regular color camera, and the false color image, of course, was taken with a monochrome camera, again, using the filters that we talked about previously. Now, a little bit about these images before we dive into the technical details. They are currently astrometrically synchronized in PixInsight, so whenever we look at the pictures, it's going to show the exact same area of the sky where they are. That'll make it helpful here in a moment. When I zoom out here, you can see that this image on the left side, the true color image, has a much wider field of view. That's because it was taken with a smaller telescope. Whereas the one on the right here, the false color image, was taken with a much larger telescope, therefore it's a lot more zoomed in. And also you can see there's a lot more detail as well in this particular image on the right. But we're going to ignore that fact in particular and kind of just focus on the colors here. Now, one thing that's very obvious off the bat, of course, is the true color image takes on a very pinkish reddish color, and most emission nebula in actual color look like this, at least if you could actually see the color with your eyes, which you can't generally because they're too dim. So a regular color camera, when you shoot a nebula, it's going to take on this reddish pinkish color. Now if you look closely, you can kind of see there's like almost a little bit of blue in there, and there's also some really dark black elements as well. Those are parts of the nebula where the light is actually being absorbed. So you can see they're actually black in both images. On the right side, we had this very distinctive blue orangish contrast color, and that's pretty typical of narrowband imagery for nebulae. Okay, so now let's get into the cool part. How is the false color image actually made compared to the true color image? Well, of course, the true color image, we just take regular images through a color camera and put them together and stack them, and that's the result. But in the false color image, we actually had to shoot it 3 times with the monochrome camera, again, using those 3 different filters. So let's look at those images. Okay, so I'm going to minimize this one, and let's pull up these guys. Now again, all these images are astrometrically synchronized. I'm going to go ahead and tile the images, and now we can look at all of them simultaneously. So now instead of comparing the true color image and the false color image, now we have the false color image down here on the bottom right, and 3 monochrome images taken with the monochrome camera using those 3 special filters. So here on the bottom right, again, we have the false color image, which combines all 3 of them. And then here on the bottom left is the sulfur 2 channel, and I'm going to refer to them as channels because when we combine them, they'll each be a channel respectively. Up here in the top left, we have hydrogen alpha, and then up here in the top right, we have O3 or oxygen 3. So what we're going to do when we make a false color image is we simply combine the 3 images to one of 3 colors, red, green, and blue. Now before we do that, if you look at the 3 different monochrome images individually, you'll notice if I put them on top of each other here, for example, so the top one is O3, and if I blink it to the hydrogen alpha, you can see it actually looks a little bit different. In the sulfur 2, you can very clearly see the outline of the nebula, but when we compare it to the O3 channel, it's diffuse in comparison. When we combine them, we're going to assign each of these 3 monochrome images to red, green, and blue respectively. And we're going to do that with a tool here in PixInsight called channel combination. You could do this in Photoshop using another tool as well, but since we're in PixInsight here, we're going to, like I said, use channel combination. I'm going to assign the sulfur image to red, the O3 channel to blue, and the hydrogen alpha channel to green. This is what makes them false color. We put hydrogen alpha into green, and normally hydrogen alpha in real life is actually more of a red color. Sulfur 2 is also more of a red color. O3, it's actually kind of in between green and blue. It's more of a cyan color. But again, we kind of almost arbitrarily, again, just put them in a red, green, and blue. When we combine them, it makes a pretty pleasing result. And so let's do that. We combine them and it spits out an image here. And this is the result you get when you combine the 3 channels. Again, sulfur into red, hydrogen into green, and O3 into blue. And so when you look at a false color image, a lot of times you're actually looking at 3 separate images combined into one. Okay, so this is how our false color image starts out, but actually we do some processing usually to clean this up a little bit. And so the previous image that you saw, this one here, is how that image ended up. Now in this case, what I've done here is what's called polarization, where the red and the blue have been brought up to make those gases a little easier to see in this case. Again, sulfur 2 and O3. So the hydrogen alpha has been muted a little bit, so you can see a little less green. There is still green in there, but we brought up the red and the blue in particular, which again correspond to the sulfur and the oxygen, to get a result that looks a little bit more like this. Okay, so back to our true color and false color comparison here. And the question then is now, why? Back to the perspective thing. So most people haven't actually seen this nebula with their own eyes. They don't know what the actual color of the nebula is. Most people, I think, would agree that the false color image, of course, is much more appealing visually. We have a little bit more contrast, again, between the orange and the blue, and that allows us to see a little bit more here. But it also reveals some things that we couldn't actually see in the true color version as well. So if we look at a particular portion of the nebula down here, I'm going to scroll down to the bottom. And so down here in what is actually a very bright part of the nebula, it actually takes on mostly a blue color in the false color image because the O3 emission is very strong here. Therefore, it's a little bit blue. In the true color image, in this particular area, you know, it's kind of just like a flat, kind of pinkish whitish color. And in the false color image on the right, you can actually see there's a feature here that you can't see in the true color image. Now it doesn't appear in the true color image because, again, we used a regular color camera, and because sulfur 2 and H alpha are both primarily red, and then again we also have this O3, this strong cyan color, it just looks really bright, and any sort of features that you would see in there basically just get washed out. But again, since we took the 3 different gases, captured each of them individually and combined them, we get this particular detail that you wouldn't get in the true color image. And this particular feature, because it's more of an orangish color than you can tell, it's actually from the sulfur 2 channel. So when I pull that up there, and again, all these images are astrometrically synced. So if I do that, and I zoom again in on that region, you can see, hey, there it is. And we look at the false color image, you can see it. But if you were to look at the O3 channel, which again is very bright in that particular region, that's not there. You can't see that. And again, the O3 in this case is probably washing it out. You can't see that little streak of sulfur that would be in there. So that's the beauty of false color. We can show more. We're getting more data, more science basically in your image. All right, so that's false color imaging in a nutshell. Again, that's just false color imagery and how it applies to nebulae though. If you go and look at other false color imagery, again, you can use that information and kind of extrapolate that information to what they've done with other objects. For example, again, the moon is a pretty popular false color image target. Lots of terrestrial objects as well. But anyways, that's all I got for this video. Once again, thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.